You're listening to the Pigskin Cafe, a podcast covering the wild world of college football. On tap for today are hot takes, controversy, and analysis on your favorite team. Here's your host, Hampton Sipper, in 3, 2, 1.
Going on, everybody? Happy Labor Day. College football is back, man. What a weekend. What a weekend that we're going to recap for you today. And I'm reporting to you live from Dallas, Texas. Hampton, where are you tuning in from?
I am in Elba, Alabama, the beautiful Elba, Alabama, ready to chop it up after a fantastic week one that isn't done quite yet. We have Clemson Duke tonight, which should be another fun game, but what a weekend it was, Chase, man. It was good to have football back on the TV, and we have a lot to talk about.
Yeah, we do. And one of those things being the controversial topic of whether Hampton's from Elba or Enterprise. But that one's for another podcast. Hey, let's jump right into it. We've got a few games we want to cover, and we'll start with last night. And boy, I'll say, Hampton, hey, credit to you and Graham. You got this one right. And I'm almost curious to hear if you were even more correct than you thought you were going to be. So let's cover FSU versus LSU. FSU wins that game by 20 points. Isn't that correct?
21, yeah. 3 touchdowns.
How did you were right, and there's times that you're right. Very rarely you're right.
Thank you. Yeah, I know.
But when it happens, I'm joking aside, but this is one of those times where I think, wow, what you guys said was on point, and you're even more right than what you probably thought about. Just kind of give me your thoughts of the game, and take it from there.
Mm-hmm. Very interesting ball game last night. The score, like you said, I believe it was FSU 45, LSU 24. So 21-point differential. And I believe the score is a little misleading because when you look at that, you believe that FSU from snap to the end of the game, from first snap to the end of the game, that they dominated. And that's not exactly what happened. The first half was a very close game, very back and forth. But starting in about the third quarter, probably toward the later end of the third quarter, FSU scored. And from that moment on, it was an avalanche of just a confluence of events going against LSU and FSU taking advantage. And I believe one of the key turning points in the game, FSU had scored, they're up 24-17. LSU's driving a little bit. And Jaden Daniels throws an interception that really probably wasn't his fault. His receiver slipped on the play. And FSU intercepted it. And I was calling for, go for the kill shot now. Throw it deep, play action pass, throw it up to your guy, Keon Coleman or Johnny Wilson. Mike Norvell didn't do that. What he did instead was crafted a methodical drive full of running the football, which they had not been very successful doing the entire night until they went to a 2-back set. They employed 21 personnel, and they kept running this counter play, and LSU could not stop it. Kind of like Alabama when they played Georgia Southern, and Saban had this infamous saying of, they ran through us like, you know what? But they go down there, have a methodical drive, mix some passes in between, and I believe it ended with a one-on-one ball to Keon Coleman, who we'll get to in a minute, because that brother absolutely balled out last night. I believe he had 9 catches, 122 yards, and 3 touchdowns. But they threw the one-on-one to him, and then from there, they just dominated. LSU, before the final touchdown that they had 50 yards of total offense in the second half. What you call that is great halftime adjustments by FSU, and I believe the main adjustment was they really limited Jaden Daniels' ability to run the football. That was kind of the lifeblood of the offense in the first half. Because as you could see, and I believe this is the major takeaway from the game, FSU's defensive line dominated, and I mean dominated, LSU's offensive line. LSU does not have a premier back, it does not look like, from the looks of the game last night. Their interior O-line was consistently beaten by the interior of that FSU defensive line. They were getting pressure pretty consistently on the quarterback, especially Jared Verse, the top 10 pick probably next year, who is an absolute demon off the edge, has great burst, great strength, really good with his hands. But they kind of took advantage of that. And so everything was on Jaden Daniels. And I believe he took a few shots in the first half that really probably told the LSU coaches, hey, we need to scale back on running him or he's not going to make it through the game. And when you take away his ability to run and you put the whole game on him as a passer, he's not the same player. Because while FSU made some adjustments and played really well, Jaden Daniels missed 3 or 4 touchdown passes easily that could have really been a difference in the game. I mean, right before half, he had Malik Neighbors 1-on-1, and if he throws a good ball on back-to-back play on one of the back-to-back plays, they scored, they go into half, it's 21-14. We have a little bit of a different ball game. Okay? Then on defense, they kind of wore out. You know, FSU kind of kept punching, never gave up on the run. And by the end of the game, they were really having success on the ground. And they attacked the weakness that I talked about in our preview show, that secondary for LSU, their liability this year.
Yeah.
And a lot of that has to do with they've got a few transfers in there. So they're, LSU's been known in the past to recruit and develop DB talent really well. Well, they got a couple transfers from some universities like, I believe, McNeese State, Syracuse. So guys that maybe aren't to the caliber of what they have in the past. And FSU took advantage of that through the air with Johnny Wilson and Keon Coleman, who we talked about. So overall, I mean, FSU, it was a back and forth game, but kind of they stopped themselves in the first half with a couple drops that Johnny Wilson had. With Jordan Travis, I thought he was concussed for a minute with a couple of the decisions he was making, but they really made some great halftime adjustments and exploited the vulnerability in LSU, which is lack of depth, especially on defense, because their defensive line played really well until they got worn out. And then they didn't have bodies to rotate in. And then they really exploited that secondary. And this is the last note I'm going to leave with. And then, Chase, I want to hear your feedback on the game. I mentioned this on our pod, our SEC preview pod, and I believe it is even more noteworthy today. Okay? LSU has lost 5 of their last 15 games. In 4 of those games, they've been beaten by 15 points or more. That is a stat there, ladies and gentlemen. And I contend, like I said on our preview pod, LSU beating Alabama last year is no different than when Texas A&M beat Alabama in 2021. People solely focused on that and ignored the other sample size of the year of them. Like I said, they got blown out by 15 points or more 3 times last year, and then it translated again in the opener against FSU. I find that very interesting. I'm not saying Brian Kelly is on the hot seat, but he better learn in the SEC you don't need to run your mouth before you play the game, and then you get blown out by 21 points. I mean, saying we're going to beat the heck out of FSU, shoes on the other foot, Brian, and they took it to you last night in Orlando, and I was very impressed. And it let the country know FSU was here, and they're a serious title contender.
Dude, I mean, yeah, you're right. This game was almost a shock how far along it seemed like FSU was. We knew they were supposed to be a good team. You're like, are they going to measure up to the hype? But on the other side of the ball, it's like LSU, did you really just spend all off season prepping for this game? Because it doesn't look like it. And I'll simply just say it like this. There was a moment in this game, and I think it was one of the last touchdowns that FSU runs in, and you can tell. I mean, I remember when I was playing football, there was a guy who I think they had maybe I'm just the kicker. I'm just observing this marvelous sport, this mindset I can't quite get into. There was this guy who I think maybe got it kicked off to him. He played middle linebacker. It was a short kickoff, and so they kicked it to him. Or maybe he was returning something. Anyways, all of a sudden, the ball's in this middle linebacker's hands. He's not an offensive player. He's a defensive player. He's not really looking for a touchdown. He's looking for contact. He wants to run somebody over with that football. And there was this movement in the game where FSU knew that they could score. So what they were trying to do is get LSU to quit. And that's when you start thinking, hey, FSU's out here bullying these kids. So I think here's my takeaway. And I'll overreact for a second. There's a lot of movement in college football right now. The ACC just brought in a few other teams, a few new teams. What I saw, and we'll get to this game, I saw UNC win, being an SEC team, can hang, got what it takes. I saw FSU beat a really good historic program in the SEC.
Top 5 team.
Made it look like they were bullying them. They can hang. If I'm the SEC, I'm thinking, how can we make this happen each and every week? Is there a spot for these teams? Because I think it was those 3 teams. It was UNC, FSU, and Clemson that said that they were not okay. They did not want to add people to the ACC. And so if I'm the SEC, I'm thinking, how can we get these 3 teams that are a little bit unhappy to come be a part of our conference? Because it's clear that they can hang. The ACC might be the strongest that it's been in a long time. It's going to be really fun to watch. So I was really impressed. We'll see about FSU if they can withstand this and can do this, game in and game out. That's always the question. But they beat, I would say, still a historically good SEC program that was not a cakewalk. So credit to them getting to the point where it felt like LSU was beginning to quit. And for them, they've got to figure out what the rest of the season's going to look like. That's when I left thinking, man, they need to kind of circle up in the locker room and say, hey, we just need to bag this one up, seal it, throw it in the back of the truck, and let's just keep on going. Let's just forget about it. Nothing you can do about it, but you cannot let this impact the rest of your season. You got one more point on that?
Yeah, one closing kind of couple thoughts. I'm with you. I'm very interested to see how LSU responds from here. Your margin of error is now gone. You lose one more, you're out of the playoff picture, and the presumed SEC West favorite, a great year 2 jump for Brian Kelly, is gone if you lose another game, which is very probable at this point with the issues we saw with their secondary, with their offensive line, the lack of a premier running back. I'm going to be very interested to see how they respond, but also how those coaches adjust, because not only was it, I believe, a talent issue, I mean, there were a couple just coverage busts that you really don't see from LSU team. So I'm interested to see that. I want to give just a real quick shout out to Mike Norvell. That is a guy, and I respect.
Long-time listener of the show.
Long-time listener of the show. Great friend of the pod.
Just the Memphis days, baby.
Yeah. He deserves a ton of credit, and so does the FSU administration for sticking with this guy. We talked about it last year with the job he did, but patience pays off. And you can tell that this team is fully bought in.
Yeah.
Last year, they came in and they had a 14-point lead on LSU, but they didn't believe yet. Now they believe. They've had a year of winning, and they know we're the biggest, baddest on the block. And I love that when there was blood in the water, they went in and they sealed the deal. That is the hallmark of a championship team. And the other hallmark is going in the transfer portal, getting a guy like Keon Coleman, who looked a lot like Jamar Chase to me, from body type, from twitch, from the ability to high point the ball. I mean, I could go on and on about that dude. And apparently it was down between them and Ole Miss. I am very thankful to the Lord above that Ole Miss did not get him, because woo, buddy, that cat is a baller. But you have other guys that they got in the transfer portal, like Jaheim Bell from South Carolina, who made an impact last night. And there are others on that defensive front. And Mike Norvell stayed the course, and now it's paying off. They are reaping the benefits. And I just want to give a quick shout out to him. They've got a big test in 3 weeks, go into Death Valley and beat Clemson. If they do that, there's nobody else on that schedule that can, I believe, contend with them, because I don't believe they play North Carolina in the regular season. So, exciting year ahead for the Noles. Can't wait to watch their progress as we go forward into the year.
Hampton, you said some magical words that seem to be the theme of this weekend. We've got one more game that we want to dive really deep into, and then 2 more that we want to just kind of get our pulse on. And the
Yeah.
question everyone has coming out of it is, do you believe now? Hampton, do
Do
you
you,
believe
baby?
in this Colorado team? Because they put a product on that field. I think that they were 21-point underdogs. It was something like
Correct.
that. Completely revamped this whole team. And they went out there into Fort Worth and beat, I would still say, what should have been TCU's that team that's going to probably lose a game they're supposed to win, and then they're going to beat someone that they're not supposed to.
Mm-hmm.
But for them, that was is this going to be, was last year's team, was that a good team, or are we going to be a good program?
Yep.
And then, do you believe now came into Fort Worth? So,
Come
what
on.
do you think about that game, Colorado versus TCU?
Well, I have to say, like most of the country, I did not see it coming.
Mm-hmm.
Shout out to my friend Scott. He texted me as the game kicked off, not ticked off. It's not a bomb. But as the game kicked off, he said, "Do they have a chance?" And I said, "No shot. No shot." I didn't think they'd get just blown out. I didn't think they'd win. I didn't think they had the depth, especially on the offensive line and defensive line. But man, was I wrong, and I was happy to be wrong. I was happy to be wrong because what we witnessed on Saturday with Colorado and Coach Prime is what makes college football special. Like storylines like that, where if you're an average Joe and you don't watch college football, but you may watch NFL, there were people tuning into that game because it was Coach Prime,
Yeah.
because of the draw and the charisma that he has. And not only is he a boisterous guy that is very confident in his abilities and his ability to build a program, he delivers. He
Mm-hmm.
delivered at Jackson State. And then in game one at Colorado, like you said, Chase, they go into Fort Worth and they beat a TCU team that went to the championship game last year. Obviously, this is a very different team. No one had any aspiration that they were going to be a championship contender this year. But still, they are way ahead in the program building phase than Colorado. And from Colorado, this is a team and a program that they won one game last year. I believe it was one game. Or they won 0. I think they won 1. But to win against a Power 5 team, your first game, and the fashion that they did it, I mean, Shedeur Sanders goes in, throws for 500 yards and like 3 or 4 touchdowns and looks incredible doing so. Very poised, knew where to go with the ball. Travis Hunter, my golly gee, I don't believe I've seen a player like him in college football in my lifetime. The closest equivalent is maybe Miles Jack when he played running back a few times at UCLA and then was having 10 to 15 tackles on defense. But for Travis Hunter to play 140 snaps, he's their best corner. He's their best receiver. And to make some of the plays that he did, I mean, that interception that he made on the goal line is alien stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that is 101. And then, as a receiver, high pointing the ball, being Shadeur's favorite target, having 113 yards and a touchdown. And I saw some people that I would label casual football fans saying, "Oh, what's the big deal with Travis Hunter? What's the big deal? We have not seen anything quite like this." I mean, the Shohei Ohtani of football, college football, I'm not going to go that far, but it's an eerie, uncanny resemblance. I mean, we have not seen anything like that. And then you throw in Dylan Edwards, the running back, who played incredible. That kid has some jets. The other receiver, last name Horn, he played well. I mean, they got a quarterback, running back, and skill guys that I believe could compete with anybody in the country. That's how legit those guys are. Now, you saw kind of as the game went along, and I was surprised that TCU didn't take more advantage of this. The defensive line and offensive line for them were lacking a little bit. Now, offensive line, they actually held up pretty well, but when TCU figured out that they could run the ball, I mean, they were gashing them. And I don't know why they didn't do that more throughout the game with the success that they were having. But when it mattered, when the game was on the line, you're up 45-42, your defense makes a stop. They showed up and they showed that championship DNA, that winner's mentality that a lot of teams often lack. And I mean, it ends with, Deion calling out media members saying, "Do you believe now? Do you believe now?" Because there's been a lot of talk and a lot of ignorant talk about, oh, he's not going to succeed. He doesn't know what he's doing. I mean, what he did was unprecedented, bringing in pretty much an entirely new roster. It's never happened before in college football. And there's going to be teams that are going to be like, we need to get our Deion. We need to do things like this. The issue is there's only one Deion. He is one of one. And I don't want to overreact and get caught up in the moment. But I guarantee you, after this performance, he's going to have great success there. Can you imagine them next year when he gets another recruiting class and when he really gets those guys on the offensive and defensive lines to really build a contender in the Big 12? I about to say Pac-12, but they're not going to be there any longer.
Yeah.
But overall, really impressive performance by Colorado. It was the story of the weekend. It was the game of the weekend, in my opinion. Just fascinating stuff. And they play Nebraska this upcoming week at home. Going to be an electric environment. And spoiler alert, I'm picking them to win. I think they are going to be 2-0 after week 2, and they're going to be one of the more fascinating storylines to watch as we progress through the year. But Chase, I know I just could gush. We could spend an hour on Colorado and what they did on Saturday, but what were your overall thoughts?
If I'm Billy Napier,
Uh-oh.
you're ahead of us, but you're starting to tremble in your shoes a little bit. This is a formula that's not going to continue to work. It's not, hey, just go hire a coach and things are going to turn around. So I'll simply say this. You said Deion's a 1 out of 1, and that it cannot be more true. I watched this game, and I'm with you. You're kind of wondering, when is TCU kind of maybe get a turnover, or Colorado's going to have to punt, and then all of a sudden it's going to be 14 points towards TCU, and then Colorado can just never catch up. And they stayed in the game the whole entire time. 2 observations. Think if Hunter would have not trusted Deion, would have stayed with FSU. He's on? I mean, he is the focal point and he's the talking point right now in Colorado. But that FSU team would get even more scary if he would have been on that FSU team last.
Great point.
For him, I think that says what caliber of player he is and how much difference maker he is. So to speak to his greatness, and I don't want to crown him just yet, but he's proven that he can do this. And I hope that his body will stay healthy so we can continue to watch. It's like Ohtani. It's awesome that he's pitching. But if he gets hurt pitching, is he just going to, now he's just hitting? So hope he can stay healthy so we can witness this.
Yeah.
Just to round this off, you've pretty much covered the game, and I agree with everything you've said. The one thing that I would say, yes, you're right, Deion's 1 out of 1. To flip this whole roster and then to put a team on the field that can compete with a team that made it to the national championship game, and it might even be a little bit of an exaggeration of how they actually showed up that night.
Exactly.
But there was another game that happened on Saturday. Baylor played Texas State. They went and got a coach, and he, I think, brought in 50-plus new transfer players. And that team, which used to be irrelevant in the Sun Belt, and I'm not saying Baylor's good, but I do think that I am starting to lean into, and I'm starting to say, hey, I'm willing to say that there's something here. That if you step into a team and you're a first-year coach, what's the worst that can happen if you hit delete and take away all the guys that don't want to be there, have a bad attitude, or not with your program, that are not going to be a part of your culture? They're going to be the slowest ones to change. This weekend, the 2 coaches that had the highest turnover with transfer portal players incoming went 2 for 2. That's why I'm saying, Billy Napier, you're on the hot seat, brother. And
Mm-hmm.
there's other coaches, and again, I'm not saying there will be a time when this doesn't work.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think we're learning is the transfer portal, it has good players that might just need a different opportunity. There's
Yep.
players like, hey, they just didn't gel. They got there, it wasn't what they thought it was. So I think that Deion has showed us that it can work. Deion's 1 out of 1. It might be that only he's the one who can make it work to that level of success. But I saw
Mm-hmm.
Texas State do it too. So all that to say, we're in an interesting time in college football
Yes, we
where
are. Mm-hmm.
buy-in, believing, culture, all those things are beginning to matter more and more and more. So
Mm-hmm.
very interesting game. Hey, credit to Deion. Anybody who beats TCU, I'm a fan of, but just to beat them in that embarrassing type of fashion,
Mm-hmm.
very grateful for. So let's keep on moving. We've got 2 more games just to touch on. We've got
Yep.
UNC versus South Carolina. This was one that we all got wrong. Hampton, what did you see? And
We
then I'll
did.
talk a little bit about Florida, Utah.
Got this way wrong. And I believe, and I want to do this going forward for our show and just for my own prediction. We sometimes get caught up in they have this skill guy, they have this quarterback, they have this linebacker, this edge rusher, and we forget games are won or lost in the trenches. That is where the game is won and lost. And that is what happened for South Carolina on Saturday night. They got hit with a bunch of injuries early on the offensive line, defensive backfield. I mean, they could not catch a break, but their offensive line gave up 9 sacks.
Yeah,
They had UNC, whose defense was atrocious last year, had 16 tackles for loss. They had -1 rushing yards on the night. Okay, you cannot win a game that way. If you told me that going into the game, those 3 stats, the sack number, tackles for loss, and rushing numbers, I'd have picked North Carolina in landslide because you cannot, that is not sustainable. You cannot win a game that way. And Spencer Rattler, I felt bad for the kid. He was battling his butt off. He actually played very well. But when your offensive line is just playing ole, 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 like with Bull just coming through, you're not going to be successful. And credit to Gene Chizik. That man has been in the lab this all season. Their defense, I mean, leaps and bounds better than last year. Now, their offensive line, South Carolina's the Swiss cheese, and that is going to really hamper their ability going forward if they don't get that fixed. But to see that market level of improvement from them, and especially their defensive line, they were nasty. Not only getting after the passer, but as a run stuffing unit. So credit to North Carolina for a very impressive performance. Drake May did what Drake May does. We're not surprised by that at all. South Carolina's got some issues, though, going forward. If that offensive line doesn't get fixed, it's going to be a long year for them. I don't care how good Rattler's playing. I don't care how good Leggett, who had a great game, I think he had 180 yards, how good he is. And it doesn't matter. Juice Wells, I know their number 1 receiver from last year got hurt. But if you can't protect Rattler, it will not matter. And if you can't run the ball and take pressure off him, I'm very worried about the South Carolina team going forward. But North Carolina, I think, showed maybe we need to put a little more respect on them going into the year, and that they're going to factor into that crowded ACC. So that's kind of what I took away from the game. Did you have any other thoughts you want to add on?
Yeah, I'll say just one quick thought, and this is, you mentioned the offensive line, and I'm reminding myself of this, that it's the offensive line is going to be something that week 1, I would be willing to bet that even the best offensive lines
Mm-hmm.
had holes and had problems week 1. It's just a group that has to mesh together,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you've been running against the same guys during practice all summer, all fall, all spring, and you just start getting used to what your defensive linemen that you're practicing against every
Mm-hmm.
day. You start to get used to their tendencies, and you need to be reminded that not everyone fits into that mold, and
Yep.
that you as a group have to gel. And I mean, we're not going to talk about Alabama in this podcast, but even there was a little bit to be desired when it came to just that group gelling
Mm-hmm.
together. So there's hope for South Carolina, but you're right. Right now,
It's a
There's hope
disaster.
there's a hope that it will get better simply just with time, I would hope, and
Mm-hmm.
coaching that in some way, to some extent, it's a little bit redeemable. Like I'm just giving a little bit more grace because it's week one. It is a
There you go.
problem that needs to be
Mm-hmm.
fixed, but I'm just reminding myself of it can be really easy as a fan. And again, I'm talking a general theme of college football, and that is to week one say the offensive line stinks. And you're
Mm-hmm.
right, because they've been practicing against the same guys for the past few
Mm-hmm.
months. So, but you're right, you great pulse on that. Let's take it to Florida versus Utah. I
Mm-hmm.
want to just remind us real quick before we really get into this.
Mm-hmm.
The final score was 24-11, which I
Mm-hmm.
would say not respectable, but it doesn't sound like Florida got blown out. Sound like they didn't have the best game. If you watched this game though, they scored 8 points in the fourth quarter. Florida did,
Mm-hmm.
meaning and Utah didn't score any. So for the most part of that game, it was 24-3 Utah.
Yep.
And that's what I saw. I saw a Florida team, you talk about struggling on offense, that just could not seem to put it together. Did not seem like they meshed, did not feel like they had culture. There was a little bit of, I don't want to mess it up, nervousness, that then they
Mm-hmm.
messed it up, is what it felt like.
Tends to
But
happen that way.
yeah, exactly. I also saw, and this is my last thing, I want to pass it to you.
Okay.
I saw Billy Napier what seemed like a loss for words. I didn't see him coaching much. I didn't see him stepping into those moments. And I can respect a guy who lets his coordinators coach. Those are the guys who seem to go far.
Mm-hmm.
But when it's 24-3 most of the ball game, you've only scored 3 points. As a head coach, you have to step in. And I
Yep.
saw a lot of times they would pan to him and he was just he's not talking to anybody, just kind of soaking it in. And I feel like his team then reflected that of like, hey guys, this is just the better team. But
Mm-hmm.
here's my last thought is that, again, Utah going to the Big 12. I said this last week on the pod. Probably one of my favorite gets before Colorado showed out.
Mm-hmm.
But just, that's a really good football team. Let's not take anything away from them if
Great
they're
program.
bad. Yeah, they didn't. Yeah, Florida's just seems to not be able to put this together. But Utah is a good football team. They play straight up hard nosed football, which seems to be what everybody's trying to get back to. So I'm excited to
Mm-hmm.
see what their season looks like. Hampton, just wrap this up, put a bow on it, like we say on this
There we go.
podcast. What do you think about this Florida Utah matchup and just the disappointment that Florida seems to continue to just live in?
Well, we picked this game last Wednesday before the game on Thursday. I believe we all picked Florida. And
Oh, talking about Utah?
did you pick Utah?
Yeah.
Okay, never mind. Chase
Whoa,
picked
whoa,
Utah.
whoa, whoa, whoa! I thought you
I
meant.
give him.
Oh, did you pick Florida?
I picked Florida.
Okay, all right. Hey,
And the reason that I picked Florida was because Utah was playing their third string quarterback. They were playing their third string quarterback. And I said, I believe my exact words were, Florida not only they have to win this game.
Yeah.
Because if you don't win this game when they're playing a backup quarterback, I'm very worried about the rest of your year. And to echo all the points you made, before the South Carolina game, and South Carolina's offensive line said, "Hold my sweet tea," Florida's offensive line was an abject disaster. Abject disaster. And I say that because Damian George, God bless him, the transfer from Alabama, he had a couple procedural penalties. He was getting beat on the edge like he stole something a couple times. Their offensive line as a whole, I didn't know this before Holly Rowe actually said it during the broadcast. That group had 19 combined starts, with 13 coming from one person. It showed on Thursday night. They could not run the ball, and the problem with them not being able to run the ball, two of their best playmakers are the running backs who we talked about before the game, and Montrell Johnson, Trevor Etienne. They never got them involved. Receiver out wide, they have Pearsall, and then they have another kid who's a freshman, number 3. I don't remember his name. He has some burst. Pearsall has some burst, but other than that, they don't really have any other playmakers on the outside that threaten the defense. And we can get into the X's and O's of where Utah dominated them, especially on the lines of scrimmage, and how Utah kind of came out punching with that first play, and how Florida's defense kind of settled in the second half, which I think part of that had to do with Utah taking their foot off the gas a little bit and knowing that they had the game in hand. But my biggest red flag in this game was coaching. Florida did not look like a well-coached football team.
Nope.
All right. How many times did they have a fourth and short, and they have a penalty, whether it be false start, illegal formation, they have to back up 5 yards.
Mm-hmm.
Then they back up 5 yards and miss a field goal. Or the special teams blunder that I've never seen before in my life watching football for 26 years, where they had 2 number 3s on the field. They literally were going to get the ball back, and then they got a penalty, and Utah was able to keep the drive alive because of the penalty. And from that moment on, it never felt like it kind of was like that was like the death blow to Florida.
Mm-hmm.
So you combine that, and then some of the play calling was mind-boggling. Just like, I don't know what you're doing. I mean, there were a couple drives early in the game where they had some good play design with multiple tight end formation and motion, and kind of getting the defense a little out of position and being able to exploit the area of the field behind the linebackers. They did that, but then they also would go, it'd be 3rd and 10, they'd run an inside zone. It'd be 4th and 14, they ran a tunnel screen to the receiver. It'd be 4th and 3, and they ran a shovel pass.
Yep.
Like, Billy, Bubba, I love you, but what are you doing, man? Like, just didn't make any sense. And then defensively, like I said, they settled in a little bit, but consistently throughout the game, they were not set before the snap. They were scrambling to get in position before the snap, and Utah is not a hurry-up tempo team. So, again, like you talked about, we don't want to overreact in week 1. We want to give a little bit of grace. You make observations, you don't make conclusions. But they got a lot to figure out, especially that offensive line, I believe, is going to be an issue all year long. But coaching-wise, they've got to do a better job in every area, special teams, offense, defense. And because what's crazy is, and this is the last point I'll say before I throw it back to you, Chase, we kind of talked going into the game, the big storyline was how Graham Mertz would perform. He played fine. Like, he wasn't the issue. Now, was he fantastic? No, but I wasn't expecting him to be fantastic. But when the offensive line was like a leaky dam with just people coming through and he was constantly under pressure, and then the play calling that was not aiding him very much, I thought he played an all right game. So if you can get the other areas shored up, maybe you have a little something. But I was just very shocked to kind of see the lack of discipline and lack of coaching that Ford displayed. And that falls on the head man, on Billy Napier, a guy I like, a guy that I think they need to give time to build his program and get his recruits in. But not a great start for them in week 1 against Utah, man.
Not at all. I'll say this. Let me correct the record. I don't know if I predicted this game because I was calling the game, so they don't let me predict the games that I call. No, I think you and Graham did pick Florida, and then I just simply didn't pick. But I think I'm gonna pick them. I picked Utah, but just out of for fun. Hey, one thing that you said that resonated was the play calling. It wasn't that it was necessarily the play that I disagreed with. It was the scenario that we were calling those plays.
Yes.
Not bad plays, but it's like, yes, when it's 4th and 3 and we're running a shuffle pass, it's just like, man, don't get beat on that play in that scenario. And that's just to further the point of you saying that the coaching felt off. It's like they just didn't have a pulse on, hey, what's our best play? Let's try to, dominate. Rather, it's like, let's try to get cute and fancy. If it works, it looks great. But if it doesn't work, yeah, I don't know. They've got to really find what team they want to be this year.
Mm-hmm.
because some of that stuff felt like they were trying to trick a team that was just kind of staying home. Like they weren't running plays to see if Florida was biting left or right, or like they weren't trying to expose these holes. It was just like they were just running plays against a team that had pretty much stayed home, stayed true
Mm-hmm.
to their form the whole game. So, hey, credit to Utah. I think they had a good outing. It was really
Good
cool to see.
plan.
It was really cool to see their fans come out. I mean, that was a
Yeah.
cool environment that I didn't expect. And I cut it and I was like, okay, Pac-12. They
Mm-hmm.
make fun of y'all that there's nobody who comes to your game, but way to go, Utah. Like they
Mm-hmm.
packed the stands. It looked like a fun environment to be in, and Florida just simply did not look ready. So, with anything, you got anything else that you want to add before we round this out?
Not really. As great as week 1 was, and like I said, we have one more game tonight. Week 2,
Yeah,
this is where we get going. We have a bunch of perennial matchups, so we can't wait to dive into in our pod that'll come out later this week, kind of previewing week 2. The only other thing that I want to say, quick hitter, um, Jalen Milroe, you made me crow a little bit, and I'm happy to eat it. Played very well against, I know it's Middle Tennessee State. I saw a lot of the things that I wanted to see from him from a passing perspective, staying in the pocket, going through progressions, delivering the ball accurately. Still some things to clean up, but I feel much more confident about the outlook of Alabama, especially going in this Texas game. And I can't wait to break that down later this week with you guys.
yeah, I'm with you. Gene Chiswick and Jalen Milrose said that they'd like to see you after this podcast.
Dude, all off season, my picture in their room circled,
Yeah,
dartboard throwing,
you're
and
bulletin board material for those guys.
out bulletin board material, and they went to work. And guess what? I got to tip my hat to them.
Hey, gotta tip the hat. I love it. I love
Got
it.
to tip the hat.
Well, hey guys, hey, the Pigskin Cafe is closed for now, but until next time, chew on that. Hey, we'll see you again later this week. 2 episodes in 1 week. We'll see you soon.